Well, good morning once again. For those of you who were at the first performance and have stayed, thank you for staying. And for those of you who are just now arriving, welcome to the city of Alexandria, Egypt. My name is Tom Flint from the North Idaho College Philosophy Department, and I will be your host and moderator for today's activities. We're going to have another presentation this morning, and then at 1 o'clock this afternoon there will be a debate over the issue of free speech and censorship, which should be fairly interesting and relevant to our times, as an issue that always is relevant, I guess. Probably it's the first thing that I'll do is to give a brief overview of the history of Alexandria, since it's, of all of the cities that we will be visiting this week or have visited, it may be the one that people are most unfamiliar with. About 100 miles northwest of modern-day Cairo, Alexandria was founded by Alexander the Great in 332 BC, after the start of his Persian campaign and on the way to his conquering the entire known world at that time. It was to be the capital of his new Egyptian dominion and a naval base that he hoped would enable him to control the entire Mediterranean area. And within a century of its founding, Alexandria became the greatest city in the ancient world and a center of Greek scholarship and science. And designed by his own personal architect, Alexandria incorporated the best in Hellenic planning and architecture. The great Lighthouse of Alexandria, which some of you may be familiar with, was more than 440 feet high and was at that time one of the 7 wonders of the world, and remnants of this colossal structure have recently been discovered. And though Alexander himself never saw the city named after him, Alexander the Great was buried there, and his tomb also has recently been located and identified. After Alexander's death and the gradual disintegration of his empire, control of the city passed to his viceroy, Ptolemy I, the first of a dynasty that ended with the death of Cleopatra, the last of the pharaohs. The early Ptolemies successfully blended the religions of ancient Greece and Egypt and presided over Alexandria's golden age. Created by the Ptolemies, the Museion, which means museum, the city's Academy of Arts and Sciences, which included the great library of Alexandria, was the finest center of learning of its day. The decline of the Ptolemies also coincided with the rise of Rome, and Alexandria played a major part in the intrigues that led to the establishment of imperial Rome. Alexandria was also a center of Jewish learning, and according to tradition, the translators of the Old Testament from Hebrew to Greek was produced there. The city also played a key role in passing Greek culture to Rome and in the theological disputes over the nature of Christ's divinity that divided the early Christian church. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, the Arabs occupied Alexandria in 642 AD. And then for the next 1,000 years, under Islamic rule and in the shadow of the city of Cairo, Alexandria underwent a serious and steady decline. And by the time Napoleon invaded Egypt in 1798, the once great city had been reduced to a small fishing village. The city's rebirth began in the early 1800s under the rule of the Ottoman Turks and the introduction of cotton, which restored Alexandria to commercial prominence. Today, Alexandria is Egypt's second largest city with a population of about 4 million, and is a thriving seaport and commercial and resort center. Some people that probably should be identified with the city of Alexandria are the mathematician Euclid, from which we get Euclidean geometry, the scientist Archimedes, the philosopher Plotinus, and Ptolemy, the great geographer, all of whom studied at the Museion. It was also at Alexandria that Cleopatra, the last of the Ptolemies, courted Julius Caesar and claimed even to have borne him a son. And it is here that the drama of Antony and Cleopatra and the collapse of the Ptolemaic Empire to Octavian, the Roman Emperor Augustus, is played out and later immortalized by one of Shakespeare's plays. St. Mark, the traditional author of the second synoptic gospel of the Bible, is said to have been preaching in Alexandria in the mid-1st century A.D. And here also lived the greatest female intellectual of the ancient world, Hypatia. She was a Neoplatonic philosopher and mathematician, and like her famous father Theon, holder of the chair of philosophy at the Museion, the great Alexandrian university. In 415, a Christian faction in the debates over the nature of Christ's divinity and struggling for power and authority within the Roman Empire in the politics of the day brutally murdered Hypatia, after which Greek culture in Alexandria quickly declined. We will hear from Hypatia and Ptolemy and Julius Caesar and Cleopatra and even Mark Antony in our panel discussion this afternoon. But right now, let us listen to an ancient Jewish sage and man of wisdom portrayed by NIC philosophy instructor Pat Lippert. Please welcome.
Thanks, Tom. Welcome. Welcome to Alexandria. My name is Simeon Ben Ezra, and I am a Jew. Faithful to God's promises, faithful to the law and the covenant that God has given us, and a person who has spent his life pondering the meaning of the laws, the prophets, and the covenant that this God has given us. But more than a Jew, I am a Jew of Alexandria in Egypt. Alexandria, which was founded in 332 BCE, has been a Jewish center as well as a Greek city from the very beginning. My family has been here in Alexandria for 250 years. Now it is 40 BC, and I am 50 years old. And I am a member of a large Jewish community here in Alexandria that includes all manner of people. We have the poor, laborers, merchants, entrepreneurs, people who are shippers and magnates. All classes of people make up the Jewish community here in Alexandria. We have the largest synagogue in the Mediterranean world here in Alexandria, and we dominate 2 out of the 5 districts of our city. We are 250 years deep in this city. But being a Jew from Alexandria poses a special problem to a Jew, to all of us as a Jewish community. Because we live in the heart now of Greek culture. Athens is in decline. Alexandria has taken its place. This now, in 40 BC, is the center of Greek learning, Greek philosophy, Greek architecture, Greek literature, and Greek science and mathematics. And all of this culture is magnificent, and its discoveries are dazzling. And in the process of seeing the dazzlingness of this culture, many of my brethren, my fellow Jews, have found the religion of their forefathers to be burdensome. They have found the religion of their forefathers to be difficult and unattractive. And in the face of this, many of them have left off being Jewish and attempted to be Greek. That is the basic challenge of Alexandria for us, the Jewish community, a challenge that faces us daily. In answer to this challenge, I have written a book, the Book of Wisdom. And I believe it provides an answer to how we as a Jewish community would live in the face of what you would call a secular culture and still maintain our religion, still maintain our God experience, and still maintain the culture that we have from it. I see it, in fact, as a poor choice to choose Greek culture at the expense of your own Jewish culture, when in actual fact, one need not make the choice at all. One need not choose between Greek and Jewish culture if but once you realize what wisdom is and how wisdom works. Wisdom is a common bridge to us all, Jew and Gentile. And if we learn to read and understand it well, if we learn to abide in its spirit, then all Greek knowledge is ours. But we also remain Jews. I am also, in addition to being a Jew in Alexandria, I am also a Jewish sage, a wise man. And as I said, I'm 50 years old. One would hope, they say, that with wisdom, or with wisdom perhaps, with gray hair perhaps, comes wisdom. Maybe perhaps now wisdom is beginning to dawn. Most people say, though, that there are many people around who have gray hair and do not seem to be wise at all. But by thinking on wisdom over a long period of time and poring over the laws and the prophets and our covenant, I've come to realize that some young people are wise before their years. In fact, before ever they see a gray hair, wisdom is theirs. They make a friend to wisdom. They take her on as their bride, so to speak. And in becoming wise so early, very often, some of them die early. The rest of us consider that a tragedy. But by poring over the manuscripts and praying and thinking about wisdom, I've come to realize that may be a reward. To be with our God, to be in the hands of God beyond all harm, even when you're young, may not be a tragedy. It may be a kind of reward. But for those of us who are left, for those of us who are still working on gray hair and wisdom the simple way, allowing time to pass and our knowledge to deepen, I have written this book. It is a summary of what I have come to understand wisdom to be. And I consider it something that all of us can turn to and all of us should pay attention to. How did I come to write this book? Well, as a Jew in Alexandria, we have a special institution. We have the institution of the master and the disciples. Our teaching, our wisdom is passed on from master to disciple. And this institution we inherited from the Greeks. We have had the master-disciple school relationship now for 250 years, here in Alexandria, in Jerusalem, and of course in Babylon. And it's interesting. This is the way the Greeks passed on their philosophy, and now it is the way we Jews pass on our wisdom. Imagine it and how it works. A master, and the word we have for master is rabbi, the master sits down in a chair, the chair of teaching, which is called yeshiva. And all the students, the disciples of the master, sit on the ground around him, and he begins to teach his wisdom. I started as a disciple. I sat on the ground around my master, who sat on the ground around his master before him, and the master before him, and the master before him. And that is the basis for my experience, or the beginning of my experience, of wisdom. I sat at the feet of my master. He taught me much. But as time went on, I showed talent. And by hard study and hard life, I became a master now as well. Now I have my circle of disciples who sit around me, and I pass on this wisdom to them. Most of what I pass on, I have also put down in this book. But as a young man, before I became a master, when I was still a disciple, I remember uttering two prayers which oriented my entire life and explained my entire book. And these are what I said. I said basically, may God grant me to speak as He would wish and conceive thoughts worthy of the gifts I have received, since He is both guide to wisdom and the director of sages. For we are in His hand, yes, ourselves and our sayings, and all intellectual and all practical knowledge To understand the structure of the world and the action of the elements, one needs first to turn to God. And so I prayed a second prayer. And the second prayer was, God of our ancestors, Lord of mercy, may by your word, who by your word have made the universe, and in your wisdom have fitted human beings to rule the creatures that you have made, grant me wisdom, consort of your throne, and do not reject me from among the number of your children. Wisdom I loved and searched for from my youth. I resolved to have her as my bride. I fell in love with her beauty, and she enhances her noble birth, I found, by sharing God's life. For the Master of all has always loved her. Indeed, she shares the secrets of God's knowledge, and she chooses what he will do. Off that prayer, wisdom came to me. Wisdom continues to come to me. And off that continued coming, I have written my book. But the book centers, like the Greeks say, in a thesis. What is the thesis of the book of wisdom? The thesis is to recognize that wisdom is a spirit, intelligent and holy, that governs the world from end to end and goes out to meet all people who seek her. If people will but seek wisdom in simplicity of heart, if people will but seek wisdom without setting conditions, without setting any conditions on the relationship, wisdom will come to them. Wisdom will come and be with them, and in the presence of wisdom, they will be led into the presence of our God. This is something open to everyone. This is not restricted just to Jews. Nevertheless, how in all detail would I describe this wisdom? I would say that wisdom is from God. She is a spirit friendly to humanity and was present with God from the beginning. When God made all things, indeed, wisdom designed them. She is great. She is the breath of the power of God, pure emanation of the glory of the Almighty, and consort of his throne. Active in the service of God and humanity, indeed, she is quicker to move than any motion, and so pure that she enters into all things. She knows all things, and she will come to all who seek her, as I said, in simplicity of heart. She it is who is the only basis for all wisdom, all knowledge, and all technical skill. She is the wisdom behind the wisdom. And to be able to recognize her is to be able to recognize real truth and trustable and lasting goodness. Indeed, to meditate on her is understanding in its perfect form. The problem is, as I said before, that the Greeks, who are so magnificent in their understanding of culture, so magnificent in their sciences and technology and in their notion of virtue and goodness and their understandings of the cosmos and the world, seem not to know this wisdom. For whatever reason, either because they will not recognize her or they cannot recognize her, it does not seem to be part of their knowledge, and yet their knowledge has its truth. Indeed, a great deal of the nobility of the Greek people is that they strive with the entirety of their being to preserve the truth that they have discovered, even in the face of this lack of the comfort and the presence of wisdom. That is what makes the Greeks noble to us. It may be to some degree a sad nobility, but it is a nobility that is undeniable. Human beings seeking truth on the basis of their own skills and their own knowledge are a noble reality. How then? How to respond to what the Greeks have to say to us? How to learn what the Greeks have to say to us and respond well to what they have, including the gift of wisdom? That is the question before us today. And I will tell you there are 4 groups we contend with in Alexandria. We are 10%, 15% of the population of Alexandria. But amongst the Greek and Egyptian populations, there are 4 groups we contend with. 3 are philosophical schools, and the other one is just the basic people of Greece, the Greeks. We will talk about those last. First off, the three schools, though. Let's pause and just spend a couple minutes with each school to understand what are its truths, what are its achievements, and how do we as Jews find these achievements nevertheless frustrating. First off, there are the Aristotelians. Followers of Aristotle, they came here with Alexander and set up a school of Aristotle in 330 BC. They have been here from the beginning. And they are the scientists, the mathematicians, the astronomers. They are the ones who study the world on the basis of their own natural intelligence. And they do a magnificent job. Indeed, just recently, as it is 40 BC right now, one of the astronomers in the Aristotelian school devised a calendar we had never heard of before. And yet it's a genius calendar, and it seems stable and will work better than any calendar anyone has ever devised before. Imagine this. He has come up with a theory that the year has 365 days, except every fourth year when we will add an extra day. By watching the stars and the planets and learning the motions of the earth and the seasons, he has discerned that 365 days is the length of a year, except for every fourth year when we get this extra day. We have never heard such accuracy before, and this is the achievement of the Greek sciences and the Aristotelians. Indeed, he was so bold as to forward this idea to Julius Caesar about 7 years ago, and Julius Caesar accepted it. And he ordered that this calendar be promulgated throughout the Roman Empire. Indeed, I understand this calendar is in effect among you today. It lasts, it works. It is good science, it is good knowledge. I believe then the Caesar promulgated it in what you're going to know as 46 BC. So the first day of this calendar, which exists up to now, was January 1st, 45 BC. 5 years ago. And now the whole Roman Empire uses this new calendar. Unfortunately, I must add that only 15 months after putting this calendar into effect, on March 15th, 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated. But we date it by the calendar that he's given us. So the calendar has become known as the Julian calendar, named after Julius Caesar. That is the power of Greek science. And that is one of the glories, the many glories, of Alexandria. And yet, what else do we have here, and how do we find this frustrating? It is frustrating really only in one sense. In the midst of studying the universe, in the midst of studying the stars, in the midst of creating this fine architecture, in the midst of understanding engineering and technical skill, why have the Greeks not discovered he who made all the things they study? This is the problem that we face. To study what is made for so long and not be able to discern by analogy the maker behind them. For us as Jews, we start from the maker, and that is of prime importance. But for them, starting with the artifacts, they seem not able to reach the artificer. And that's the source of our frustration. We try to point out that there may be a God behind all this that created all this. And they say that they are not sure about that, and they talk to us about principles that basically make the universe work. But beyond principles, they will not go. And that is the frustration we face as Jewish people. But in the face of that frustration, I offer a prayer. I offer that between us, in the midst of studying the world, and studying the universe and how it works, we may together work toward recognizing the maker. We may yet realize there is a maker behind the universe. Who is it that would lead us to this maker? It will be wisdom. Wisdom works throughout the sciences. All the sciences are the fruits of wisdom. And all our thoughts are the fruit of wisdom as well, all our sayings. And somehow off this common basis, I pray that we may be able to work together, to some degree, recognize the common maker. Those are the Aristotelians, the scientists. Small blame attaches to them. Perhaps in their struggle for God, they simply get distracted by the beauty and the power of God's creation. We attach little blame to the Aristotelians and the scientists. Also, as well, we attach little blame to the Stoics. The second group of Greeks are the Stoics. And the Stoics basically care not for science. They care not for mathematics. There are no astronomers in that way. They do not pour their energies into analyzing and controlling the external world. No. No. Their center is the internal world. For them, the center of life is the life of virtue. Virtue lived in harmony with the universe. For that to be achieved, and if that is achieved, you achieve the happiness that human beings are capable of. What is it to have a life that is in harmony with the universe? What does this mean according to the Stoics? Very simply, you ask them first, what is the universe? And they are materialists. They say everything we know, everything we've sensed, and everything we sense is some kind of material thing. Everything we sense is some kind of body. Well, then we say, what's the universe? And they say simply, the biggest body. It is one great thing, and we are all part of it. All right. What goes into this body? Well, there are two principles, they say. Once again, they're Greeks. They go to principles. There's a material principle, which is just passive. It just lays there. But then in the middle of it, there is the active, creative fire, the active principle. And this principle is called logos, or spirit, or reason, or divinity. For the Stoics, God is the soul of the world. It is the animating, creative, active fire that moves through the world, that makes all things be, and that makes all events happen. And if you pay attention to that divinity, and you live in accordance with that divinity, you will be happy, and you will be good. You will have attained virtue. How do we do this? If the universe has this active principle moving through it, how do we join up with this? Simple, they say. We have within us reason, and reason is a spark of that divinity. Reason is that active principle inside each of us. And if we will but listen to reason, we will obey something called the natural law, and we will be good. And if you are good, you will be one within yourself, and you will be one with the universe. And they do this. They are kind men. They insist on virtue. They are some of the best behaved and most noble of the citizens of Alexandria. But there is one frustration for us, and that is that for most of them, they see their lives and themselves as mortal. If the universe is a vast material thing, and we have borrowed the spark of reason for but a moment, then at death we are gone. So then the question becomes, if death is the end, what is the best way to live? And their answer is simple. Cultivate the virtue within yourself, control and respond to what you can control and respond to, and the rest of it, in occurrence, is the will of the divine principle. And so cultivating virtue within, they attain what happiness they can. But for us, this is frustrating. For we recognize that human beings are made in the image of God, and they are made for immortality. If you know wisdom, you know the power of God. And if you know the power of God, you are at the root of immortality. Having had that experience, to listen to people talk of their mortality with such assurance leads us to frustration. But there is a great deal of common ground between us that we can use to build a better understanding. One of the most interesting things they have thought of, and it's new to us, is that if each of us has the same spark of reason within us, if each of us is meant to obey the same natural law, why then each of us should have equal human rights. Equal human natural rights are an achievement of the Stoics. And I, as a Jewish sage, find them promising. There is a touch of wisdom here, and we can build on this in the future. So equal human rights, a common goodness, obedience to reason, and the natural law are all things we hold in common with the Stoics. Those are the first two groups that we deal with, the Aristotelians, the scientists, and the Stoics. There is one more philosophy we must basically look at, one more school of philosophy of master and disciple. And for this, I must go further afield. This group is called the Epicureans. They too have had their school here in Alexandria pretty much from the beginning. The Epicureans, in one sense, cause us the most problem because they have one basic principle, and that is that pleasure is the good. And if one maximizes pleasure, one is maximizing goodness. And we get into a lot of moral difficulty with the Epicureans on this basis. And yet, the best of the Epicureans lead lives as noble as the Stoics. The best of the Epicureans lead lives that are indistinguishable in terms of behavior from the Stoics. They insist that pleasure is a very complex reality, and it must be balanced off higher and lower and so on and so forth, and they end up leading noble lives. So it is not impossible. They are not sybarites. They are not people who engage in immoral behavior. Unfortunately, though, they are, like so many others, betrayed by their followers. Many who hear the notion that pleasure is the good take it much too hard without what we would call enlightenment. And on that basis, they engage in behaviors that ruin the honor of their families, that ruin the goodness of their lives. They engage in cults that kill children when they misunderstand this Epicurean teaching. Where does it come from? How could someone believe that pleasure is the good? How could they come to this knowledge? Simple. Once again, the same question we put to the Stoics. What's the world? What's the universe? And what are you? You ask the Epicureans what the universe is, they say, we have a different idea from the Stoics. The Stoics say it's a great big thing, true, but we know better. We have a new idea. And once again, this is one of these new theories. We understand the world to be a collection of little teeny pieces of stuff that never go away. These little teeny pieces of stuff you cannot see with your eye, but trust me, they're there. And by putting these little teeny pieces of stuff together, we get things and people. How does it work? Well, it's simple when you understand these little teeny pieces, which they call atoms, are arrayed on a spectrum. And on one side, we have the biggest, heaviest atoms. They're like little chunks of rock. We still can't see them. But we have big, heavy, jagged atoms. And they have lots of little hooks on them, so they can hook up with other atoms and make things. That's one side of the spectrum. And then on the other side, as you go across the spectrum, you have the teeniest, tiniest little atoms that are almost entirely smooth. They have hardly any hooks, and they weigh almost nothing. In between, of course, we have all the middling atoms. We have big and chunky over here, and then we have smaller and lighter and smoother and smaller and lighter and smoother and smaller and lighter and smoother till we get over to these atoms. These atoms obviously make up rocks. These atoms make up the human soul. For if all things are made of atoms, then the human soul is made of atoms as well. And that is the way they understand who they are, and that is how they understand their lives. Why do any of these atoms come together? And their answer is random chance. The only reason there is anything is because things have come together randomly. And what will happen someday? They will fall apart randomly. Does that include people? Yes, it does. Does that include my soul? Yes, it does. They have the most interesting notion of the soul, not something we're familiar with at all. And that is that basically the soul, being made of atoms, disintegrates after death. How do we understand this? Well, we know by watching dead bodies that they disintegrate after death. How does the soul disintegrate? Well, they say the soul, of course, being a thing, is made from atoms, like everything else, but it's made of the tiniest little atoms. And it's like a vapor, and it fills up the body and animates it while you're alive. But once you're dead, the soul rises up out of your body and floats above it like a vapor. Until what? Well, until a wind blows. Because the moment the wind blows, that disperses your soul atoms, and you're gone. That's oblivion, and you're dead. What you want to hope for throughout your life is that you die on a calm day. Or you die in a place without a breeze. Because then your soul will stay together. You'll maintain consciousness for a short time. But sooner or later, somebody will open the door, the breeze will blow through, and you'll be gone. The greatest tragedy, then, is to die outside on a windy day. As you fall over, you go up, and you are gone that fast. That's their notion of life. We come together by chance. We are a random collection of atoms. And when the atoms fall apart, we are gone. And that is the meaning of life and the meaning of individuality. By itself, we might not have too much trouble with this notion. We might want to talk. But you can see how, given this notion, pleasure may be defined as the only really worthwhile good. I mean, if you're together by random chance and you're going to fall apart in the near future, you might as well enjoy yourself. And on this basis, many of the Greeks and some of my brethren, the fellow Jews, have had trouble. But there's more to it than that. And this is the problem. Because people who believe this and practice this over time tend to do evil things that their beliefs do not require. And they do it, we believe, because they have bad consciences. Bad in many ways, but off this bad conscience, they tend to do bad things. Let me read to you their argument. Let me read to you their understanding of life, and let me read to you what they think of us. They say, our lives are short and dreary. There is no remedy when our end comes. No one is known to have come back from Hades. We came into being by chance, and afterwards we shall be as though we had never been. The breath in our nostrils is a puff of smoke, reason a spark from the beating of our hearts. Extinguish this, and the body turns to ashes, and the spirit melts away like the yielding air. Come then, let us enjoy the good things of today. Let us use created things with the zest of youth. Take our fill of the dearest wines and perfumes. On no account forego the flowers of spring, but crown ourselves with rosebuds before they wither. No meadow excluded from our orgy. Let us leave the signs of our revelry everywhere, since this is our portion, this is our lot. And as for the upright man who is poor, let us oppress him. Let us lay traps for the upright man, since he annoys us and opposes our way of life. We see him as a reproof to our way of thinking. The very sight of him weighs our spirits down. So, let us see if what he says is true, and test him to see what sort of end he will have. Let us test him with cruelty and with torture, and thus explore this gentleness of his, and put his patience to the test. Let us condemn him to a shameful death, and since God will rescue him, or so he claims. Their malice makes them blind. Their guilt keeps them from seeing the hidden things of God. And off our experience, we know that the souls of the upright are in the hands of God, where no harm can reach them. And life is not a mortal chance occurrence. And death is not the end of life. And the program of goodness and the understanding of God's power take us beyond death and into this condition of being in the hands of God. If they cannot put up with uprightness, if they cannot put up with goodness, then we really want to talk about how they see human life and how they see the goals of human life and how it should be lived. And yet, never forget that the pursuit of pleasure is given us by God. And pleasure is a goodness. And we should pursue pleasure within this context. And so I pray that we may, by pursuing pleasure together in our various ways, come to some common notion of what pleasure really is. Come to some common notion that wisdom gives us of where pleasure really takes us. Those are the three groups of Greeks that we contend with. You can see our challenges, you can see our frustrations, and you can see the hope that we have. Finally, there's one more group I won't touch on too much, and those are the Greeks who basically worship idols. They are the ones who bother us the most. That someone would take a statue of stone or wood and cover it with gold and call that God is to us the greatest tragedy. That someone would so organize and conceptualize God as to reduce him to some idol is the greatest tragedy. And the greatest crimes occur in response to this idol worship. And yet, the origin of idols is understandable. For instance, rulers who wish to be revered will send their statue to each of their villages so the statue may be honored in their absence. As time goes by and customs harden, this notion of rendering obedience and worship to the emperor or the king becomes law. And people grow up in a situation, they obey the laws they are given. It's understandable. Or more touchingly, a father touched by untimely mourning, by the loss of a child, may wish to have a statue of that child created so that he may have someone to talk to, with whom to assuage his grief. And as time goes by and he talks about talking to this child and this statue, others may begin to talk to it as well. And it too may take on a tradition and a custom and harden into law. But in either case, this is not God. But in both cases, this is understandable. Whether from pride or whether from the grief, the heartache, and the misfortune that come to us in life, idols have their beginning. And this is basically what we want to work with. We want to talk to people about idols and their beginning. As we said, and as I said in the book, idols were the beginning of all what we call in the Jewish community fornication. All the worshiping of false gods started with idols and the desire for idols. And I assert idols were not here at the beginning. And I assert as well that idols will not be here at the end. Idols are a part of our human history now, and they are something with which we struggle. But against idols and against all our frustrations, I return us to wisdom. What I have done at the end of my book is write a description of wisdom. Off all my experiences of the touches of wisdom throughout my life, I have piled up the adjectives that explain her characteristics. What I wish to do with you today is share this notion of wisdom, share this list of properties or characteristics, and listen within yourself and see if any of these properties or characteristics have an echo in your own experience. This is what rules the universe. This is what moves behind our experience and ahead of our experience and behind our knowledge and supports our knowledge to whatever extent it's true. And this is what supports human goodness as well. What is wisdom? Wisdom is a spirit friendly to humanity. But here's what she basically is. I said that within wisdom, is a spirit intelligent and holy, unique, manifold, subtle, mobile, incisive, unsullied, lucid, invulnerable, benevolent, shrewd, irresistible, beneficent, friendly to human beings, steadfast, dependable, unperturbed, almighty, all-surveying, penetrating all intelligent, pure, and most subtle spirits. For wisdom is quicker to move than any motion. She is so pure, she pervades and permeates all things. She is a breath of the power of God, pure emanation of the glory of the Almighty. So nothing impure can find its way into her. For she is a reflection of the eternal light, untarnished mirror of God's active power, and image of his goodness. Although she is alone, she can do everything. Herself unchanging, she renews the world. And generation after generation, she passes into holy souls and makes them friends and prophets of God. For God loves only those who dwell with wisdom. She is indeed more splendid than the sun. She outshines all the constellations. Compared with light, she takes first place. For light must yield to night. But against wisdom, evil cannot prevail. Strongly she reaches from one end of the world to the other, and she governs the whole world for its good. This is the common bridge and the common challenge and the common invitation that awaits all human beings, Jew or Gentile. And it is the basis for a common understanding for civil peace, civil justice, and goodness amongst men. I have only one prayer to finish, and it is a prayer for all of us for wisdom. And I say three things. To the extent we each can recognize her, to the extent we can recognize wisdom, we can build truth and justice into the affairs of men. To the extent that we each can respond to her, we will achieve a lasting and genuine goodness. To the extent that we each can receive her, we will be led to God being present to us all. I pray we may all do this and so lead lives that are reflections of the God of wisdom. Thank you. Okay, I suppose we have a minute or two for a couple of questions? Plenty of time. Oh, okay.
Just come to the microphone so we can get it on the videotape, please.
Yes, if you want to ask a question, I'd really appreciate questions. Whatever questions you have, you just have to come down to this microphone right here. Anyone brave enough to do that? I'm not wisdom. You're not facing wisdom here. I just write about it. Good.
What is your position on capital punishment?
Pardon me?
What is your position on capital punishment?
What is my position on capital punishment?
I am absolutely opposed. I am absolutely.
Yes. Okay, you're opposed to it. Capital punishment. In my time in Alexandria, we definitely had capital punishment. Yes. And we had problems with this in the nature of our community. Blasphemy, for instance, was a punishable offense in that sense. But I'm sorry, we did have capital punishment. Yes.
Why do you refer to wisdom as she?
Wisdom has always, at least in the writings in the Bible, in these writings, has been understood to be feminine and has been understood as she from the beginning. Yes. It is personified. It is basically a personification of God's power. It is not a person. It's a personification of God's power in the universe. And God's power in the universe moves through the universe in what would be called a classically feminine manner. But it is she we have to get to know. She rules things. Yes?
How well did the four Greek philosophies tolerate your philosophy?
Okay, good. Well, we were rather easy to ignore. That's one of the good parts of the situation. We actually, by what Professor Jenkinson has called, by means of fortuitous accident in Alexandria, were able to live in a state where diversity was allowed and survived. It did not survive because we had a Bill of Rights or anything like that. It survived because we had a balance of power. The Jewish community is very large, and if they do something to us, there will be a great deal of problem. We have a lot of power. On the other hand, the Greeks are powerful, and the Romans are powerful, and the Roman Empire has a policy of accepting whatever gods are available, lumping them together, And, you worship this, great. Okay, we'll take one of those statues back to Rome. That'll be fine, too, as long as you pay your taxes and obey the laws. So on that basis, by accident, we have in balance of power. We have a kind of civil justice. We have a kind of civil peace. Yeah. Okay. Other possibilities. Yeah.
Why are human rights any different now than they were today?
Human rights it depends. It is a long struggle to understand what human rights are, and then which human rights are truly universal and which ones are less universal. I'm not an expert on our situation, but don't we have a basic, one of our rights is, I'm not going to get into this. I can't get into the Bill of Rights. I don't know. But I remember things like, certain rights that are really important to a certain people at a certain time prove not to be universal or necessary for all people. So there's a long struggle to realize which ones are universal and which ones aren't. Better than that, there's a long struggle to realize how different rights that compete with each other are to be balanced, one against another. And that is the struggle of millennia. The best rendering, I think, of human rights, without a doubt right now, is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was written in 1948 in the UN. And that gives all these different kinds of rights that are kept in a kind of tense balance. And it doesn't tell you specifically what to do, but it tells you the ground rules, the parameters for figuring out what you should do in specific situations. But that's the struggle of 3,000 years to realize those rights and a list of them. Also, human rights are always based on some understanding of the human being and some understanding of the universe. And our understanding of the human being and the universe differ. And so Jacques Maritain, the French philosopher, was one of the people who helped draft the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And he says everybody in the room here agrees that human rights are important. In fact, everyone in the room here comes up with pretty much the same list of human rights. What you don't want to do is ask them why they think they're important. If you do that, then the kettle of worms opens up, and that's it, you're sunk. So you basically assume that people recognize rights, and in the common recognition, we will try to enforce them, and we won't go too deeply into that situation. My response is there are two levels of human rights from my character. Plain reason can recognize a whole series of human rights. By plain reason, you can recognize that killing people is probably a bad thing. Thou shalt not kill pops up with everybody's philosophy. They are negative requirements. They tell you not to do something bad. But as for requirements that positively tell you to do something that's good, like we have in our law, like love your God with your whole heart, your whole mind, and your whole soul, that kind of thing, plain human reason is not going to discover those on its own. And so we have a kind of difference between the negative commandments, which everybody can recognize, and certain positive commandments, which come only out of specific experiences. And a lot of the trouble in history and a lot of the persecution of people with regards to ignoring their human rights comes out of that difference. When people try to enforce a positive right at the expense of the negative rights, we are probably doing bad. So, for instance, one of my positive commandments is that you honor the Sabbath. And then if you don't, I kill you. I'm going against the thou shalt not kill commandment in favor of the honor the Sabbath commandment. So when I am enforcing a positive right at the expense of a negative right, which is what history is full of, then I'm in trouble. The key to the whole business is that we shall campaign and witness to our positive rights and our positive experiences without costing us our negative rights, or costing anyone our negative rights.
We still have freedom of speech, though, when we do that.
We have what?
We still have our freedom of speech.
Yes.
In some facts or some examples, that is being taken away from us when we're incarcerated.
When we're incarcerated, take away our freedom of speech? Okay, I'm not an expert on that portion of the law. Come this afternoon. We'll have someone here who can handle that. That'll be good, okay? I'm not an expert on being imprisoned. Okay. I've heard the food is bad. Beyond that, I don't know. Okay. And then I heard the food was good. So. Any other questions? Well, I thank you for coming. I hope to see some of you again at 1 o'clock. There'll be we'll have a discussion, kind of debate over censorship and the free expression, of speech. And that'll be at 1 o'clock. Thank you. Thanks, guys.